It is time to talk about what this book means. We have developed several themes. First, there is a special kind of strength in an ancient republic related to its poverty, its love of soil, and its sense of honor. When these strengths find their place in the world, they will lead to political success, and in the case of Rome, to an empire. This might be the second thing to recognize about this book. It establishes a species of pattern in politics, where the virtues of a political regime are related to subsequent vices and its ultimate downfall. Last, we have seen that Christianity entered the world and had a profound effect on the politics of its day, and probably made things like the ancient Roman Republican spirit difficult to revive. Now, is there a way out of this pattern of rise and fall? Is there a way to reconcile otherworldly Christian religion with healthy politics? I said near the end of the last video that we need more data to answer these questions. Now I want to present the data, as it were. I have been suppressing something. Montesquieu makes important comparisons between the modern world and the ancient world at various places in this book. When you add these places up, you see that there may be a political and religious practice that improves upon Republican Rome and Eastern Rome. England is superior. England is the country that may allow for a way out of the pattern and may establish a good religious settlement. Here, a little bit more background about this book is in order. Initially, the book that has come to us as Considerations on the Romans was supposed to be the first part of a three-part book. The first part is on the Romans. The last part was an essay on England, praising England for its excellent political institutions. And later, these considerations on England made their way into the Spirit of the Laws, Book 11, Chapter 6. Too much praise of England at this point in history would have caused a stir in France, and Montesquieu took his praise of England and kept it in his personal archives for well over a decade. When viewed in light of his praise of England in his later works, his discussion of Rome in the Considerations can look almost like a critique of Rome and its policies, and an argument for English policies. Now, I have tried to show that Montesquieu is no uncritical lover of Rome, even in Considerations. Montesquieu seems to admire the Romans for their single-mindedness as they pursued aggrandizement, for training their citizens in military virtues, and for conducting their foreign policy with a cunning success never since equaled. But their success came at the price of their liberty. Wealth acquired through conquest corrupted them. As they gained success, they needed more manpower, and this opened the way toward granting citizenship to non-Romans. Eventually, they granted citizenship to everyone in Italy, and then later to everyone in the empire itself. Moreover, in order to rule outside of Italy, Rome had to put big armies abroad. This meant that they gave their generals and governors arbitrary power in those distant parts of the empire for pretty long periods of time. From this, civil war arose, as governors and generals stationed abroad would have different interests than the Romans, and little was done to restrain those governors and generals, nor could much be done. There was a particular line about where this all headed that I never mentioned in my earlier videos. It is from chapter 15. How many wars do we see undertaken in the history of Rome? How much blood shed? How many peoples destroyed? How many great actions? How many triumphs? How much statecraft? How much sobriety, prudence, constancy, and courage? But how did this project for invading all nations end? A project so well planned, carried out, and completed, except by satiating the happiness of 5 or 6 monsters. It leaves one asking the question, was it worth it? Was the enticing Roman Republican greatness worth the horror of Nero, Caligula, Commodus, Caracalla, Domitian? That gives us 5. I would add Tiberius to get us to 6, but I'm a stickler. So could there be a republic without becoming an empire? Would it be strange if I said that for Montesquieu, England seems to be an example? It seems strange because, of course, England gained an empire. But was its empire akin to the Roman? The first thing to notice in Montesquieu's treatment is from the chapter where he talks about the differences in modern armies. Modern armies do not like to physically exercise. Modern soldiers find too much use of military weapons ridiculous. Moderns have their armies dissolve without fighting a single battle. Moderns have much by way of desertions in their army. For moderns, courage comes from with the confidence of the multitude, not as an individual virtue. Why is this? For Montesquieu, I would submit it is an extension of modern commerce that has eroded martial virtues, not an extension necessarily of Christianity per se. People are more concerned about money than war. Trade has made war more difficult. No one would think of massacring or enslaving populations in the modern world. All these bloodthirsty practices of the ancient world are now kind of forbidden and frowned upon. They contradict the mores, the humane mores of modern commerce. As Montesquieu says in The Spirit of the Laws, commerce softens mores. Being scarcely fit for war, as Montesquieu says in chapter 3, because one is corrupted by luxury, is not necessarily corruption. Moreover, as Montesquieu says in chapter 4, page 47, commercial powers can continue in a state of mediocrity a long time if they would but stay there. Upon further review, it does appear as a vice that, quote, Roman citizens regarded commerce and the arts as occupations of slaves. They did not practice them. In a similar vein, I have already mentioned how Montesquieu imagines that modern armies, despite their being softer, would own those ancient armies because of advances in technology. Montesquieu mentions especially the compass and the invention of gunpowder, as well as the modern principle of the division of labor, as making modern armies too much for anything that came before them. This is discussed in chapter 4, pages 48 and 49. Tough is good, but gunpowder is better, and the English lead the world in this department. The next systematic discussion of the English is found in chapter 8, where Montesquieu explicitly praises the English government. Montesquieu says that the government of Rome was admirable, then that Carthage perished because of its corruption, then that the Athenians loved the appearance of liberty more than liberty itself. Then he speaks of his contemporary republics in Italy, which are also corrupt and decadent. After listing all these political communities, Montesquieu writes this: the government of England is wiser, because a body there continually examines it, and continually examines itself. And such are its errors that they never last long, and are often useful for the spirit of watchfulness they give the nation. He is talking here about England's parliament being superior to any of Rome's institutions, being wiser than any of those institutions. England's institutions are superior because they institutionalize watchfulness, self-improvement, and public-spiritedness beyond the walls of Parliament. Rome's class competition was based only on mutual animosity and distrust. Another example of how the English are better comes from chapter 16, where Montesquieu defends the separation of powers. Chapter 16 is the chapter about military dictatorships and chieftains who united legislative, executive, and judicial power. But Montesquieu says Europe has a different practice. The kings of Europe, who are legislators and not executors of the law, princes and not judges, have divested themselves of the part of authority that can be odious. And while granting favors themselves, they have committed to special magistrates the meting out of punishments. It is the separation of powers that makes for a more objective enforcement of the law and a better deliberation about the law while it is being considered by legislatures. The division of judicial and executive authority and the division of executive and legislative authority make each kind of authority better at what they do. It is knowledge of that benefit from the separation of powers that makes the British Constitution superior to Rome's mutual hostility. Much less is said in Montesquieu's considerations about the proper religious settlement. It would seem to have some opposite characteristics of the Eastern Empire. It would be characterized by toleration of religious differences instead of enforcement of unanimity that the Justinian of Montesquieu's imagination sought to enforce. It would not seem necessary to have religion grounded in the gods of the city, because patriotism itself would be less important in a commercial time. The new subdued patriotism could be placed on a different basis. National unity could be based on collective commercial interests and the division of labor instead of civic religion. Neither the fusion of power nor civic religion seems to be best. So ultimately, there are good reasons to think that Montesquieu's considerations on the causes of the greatness of the Romans and their decline is ultimately a critique of the Romans. The way the Romans did business was unjust and dishonest and unnecessary. The way of the English seems better. No Englishman would have been accepted in Rome. They would be hopelessly bourgeois and seen as unwilling to sacrifice themselves. But no Roman would be accepted in England. They would be considered vicious, murderous, and dishonest. Ultimately, just as so many philosophers have been taken with the ancient thinkers, too many modern politicians have been taken with the example of Rome. Rome was but the boyhood of politics.